I'm going to do this very quickly in 20 minutes, so there's enough time to ask questions. I've got 12 slides to show you before I get onto the mid-year estimates. This one up here is a slightly complicated graph about the population of the British Isles and how it's changed since 1500. But the key reason to put it up is to say that things are complicated. Some things I think are simple, some things are complicated. If you look in detail at it, the higher up you go, the higher is the population of the British Isles. Till now, this is Ireland and the UK together. The big sweep out to the left is the famine in Ireland, which was a huge demographic event. And the big sweep out to the right, 2008, is the A8 migration. We invited people to come in 2003, especially when we opened up. Quite a lot of people came. It had some influence on what's going on in Britain at the moment, but it may also matter for trying to understand what's happening to life expectancy now, because this country was very fortunate in getting a large number of young, healthy, fit people coming, disproportionate numbers of whom may have well worked in care homes and so on. I'm going to mainly talk about what we know has happened, but a really complicated thing is then trying to work out why it has happened. And I suspect we're going to spend the next 10 years trying to do that. But I thought I'd start with that particular slide. What do we know has happened? And when did we begin to suspect that something is going wrong? It was 2013, the summer of 2013, when analysts in what by then I think had become Public Health England started saying something's going wrong with mortality and producing kind of unofficial reports that got into the press. In February 2014, I wrote an article for the New Statesman asking why are the old dying before their time, and this is one of the graphs from that about the recipients of social care, who was getting visits from adult social services. These visits were just 15 minutes that you used to get once a week. Somebody would check you're okay. I learnt last week, I live on a road in Oxford, and the news went round the road last week that a man had died 7 weeks ago, and our postman had found him the week before. So 6 weeks lying at home dead, just a few houses away from where I live. That becomes increasingly common. If he had had an adult social worker who had turned up once a week for 15 minutes, well, A, he might not have died, but at least the body would have been found. So that those are the kind of issues we're interested in. Here's the very first 2% drop in life expectancy. The first recorded falls in Britain were for elderly women. And again, I'm going to give you the guessing. The guessing is that elderly women were much more likely than elderly men to be living on their own, and more likely to be dependent on the state or Meals on Wheels or so on. They're the kind of canary in the mine. So you expect elderly women's mortality in a time of crisis to increase first, and then elderly men, and then it spreads. And I'll get on to the mid-year estimates and show you how far it appears to have spread so far. And there's been a running battle about the extent to which influenza has been responsible for this. At the time, we were saying that the most are influenza and pneumonia. Often deaths from influenza are recorded as pneumonia. Could have contributed was 5.8% and 3.5% of the deaths, unless there was mass misdiagnosis on death certificates. Whatever it is will be multi-causal. When something as bad as what's just happened happens and continues to happen, it is quite likely that almost everything had to have gone wrong. So the going wrong includes the threat of closure of 752 care homes. Didn't happen. But if you have hedge funds who own the landlords who are renting out to their care homes, who aren't getting the return, who threaten their care homes with bankruptcy and so on, that's just one of the many, many factors that was going on in this period, 2012, 13, 14, that we're looking at. The graph there is target 1A of National Health Service, which is preventable deaths. And you can see the health service is going down and down. They are helping prevent preventable deaths. They classify a series of causes of death as preventable. And then it begins to flatline. And it began to flatline late 2011 to 12. right? The NHS has its own indicators, its own monitoring. The one interesting thing we've discovered in the last few years is that although lots of organisations are responsible, including having a statutory responsibility to monitor things, nobody appears responsible to have to do anything about it. And we wouldn't have known that without these events. And there's chance, there's coincidence. It just so happened that the very worst figures of all in any one year, the 2015 mid-year estimates, which revealed that 52,000 more people had died than we thought had died, were scheduled to be released and released exactly on schedule on exactly the day that the referendum result was released. Now, utterly understandably, the news media of Britain was transfixed with the fact that 52% of people had voted to leave. And that's the kind of news that you have to have, not to have the news that the biggest rise in mortality since the Second World War has occurred. And the two may be related. I won't go through the figures because this is old news to those of you who know this. But 2012, 13, 15, ramping up and up. 14 was a little dip. We're beginning to get little dip periods. Kind of mortality rises up, and then the best guess that I have is that enough of the frail have died because the health service and social care service has a capacity. But when it goes over that capacity, enough of the frail die because they can't be cared for, that you get a sort of 12 months of grace when the death rates go down for a little bit and then they're up again. You have to remember in this period, this is the first time ever we cancelled almost all routine operations in NHS hospitals for at least a month. And mortality even rose then, despite the fact that we'd actually emptied the beds ready for one particular winter. Other fortunate things in terms of trying to explain this. Our last cold winter was 2010. Thanks to the amount of carbon we've put in the atmosphere, well, we may argue about this later, but honestly I think we agree it's carbon. Thanks to the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere, we have had the longest string of warm winters ever on this period. So it is not cold winters. This is what a flu epidemic normally looks like. Short, sharp, 5 weeks. These are the ones that have occurred in the past in England. They're not long, steady things that continuously kill lots of people. One reason for putting this slide up is that my friend Tom Harrison has told us, there's currently very bad flu in Australia. And the real worry is because we've been saying flu continuously, it's gone quiet recently, but saying flu since 2012-13, the worry is what happens when the flu really comes? And what happens if the flu comes at a time when we've become used to rising mortality, so we're not shocked by it. So a new strain of flu may be coming this winter. And the whole point is, now is the time to start talking about it. There is enough time between now and the winter to get ready properly for what could be our first serious epidemic of flu for years. These are very crude figures, but worked out for the mid-year estimates. And going all the way back as well, using all the estimates since 1832 that we've had in this country of the years of worst rises in mortality. The worst year was 1918-19, a flu pandemic. And of course the war, but the flu pandemic was worse. The second worst year for a rise in mortality was 1940. The third was the very cold winter of 1929. The fourth was the Great Frost of 1895. And then the cholera, when John Snow was, supposedly taking the handle off the pump, which he took off a bit late, 1846, 1849, and then 2015. I'm just trying to get you an idea about how much this matters. And by the way, the punchline is, and it's got worse since then. Right? The interesting question is, we've kind of got used to it. I'll get on to that, the conclusion. The question is, well, how bad would it have to get before we got bothered? Hey, this is only, number 7 out of bad years since 1832. Maybe that just isn't good enough. And what I worry about is to what extent English society has changed from a society that would have cared and be scared about this in the past to one which accepts it in the way that this kind of thing is now accepted in the United States. You can go back to Margaret Thatcher. I think in 1985, Margaret Thatcher signed up to WHO Target 1, which was to halve inequalities in mortality by the year 2000. Now, they actually doubled. But the good thing was that she thought that they would halve. She thought what she was doing, trickle down of money, would make the country better, and they would halve. New Labour had a series of 4 targets. They hit the 2 easy ones, which were the diseases which were coming down anyway, and they didn't do that badly on the other 2. As far as I'm aware, this government has no targets. It may do. But the interesting question is, why could Margaret Thatcher have targets for improving health and our current government not? Early warning signs. David Cameron, shortly after becoming Prime Minister, announced that there'd be a new happiness measure. We monitor how much we're going to make the country happier. And so the major components of this, and Onus were tasked with producing it, the key components were questions about your health, annually asked. Nobody actually looked at the happiness measure after it was declared. I've seen no news reporting of it. I assume ONS still produce it. But these were the data. They were derived from the British Household Panel study by ONS about people telling us that they were getting iller. So it's a bit like Spike Milligan. You know, on his gravestone it says, "I told you I was ill." When I first presented this, very good friends, very, very good epidemiologists told me that never happens. That has to be artifact. It will be an artifact. It will be a change in question wording. You never get a change that fast. But it's ironic in hindsight that we asked the population how their health was, and they told us it was getting better, and they happened to have told us it could be complete coincidence that we asked people about their health and they told us it was getting worse, and then they started dying in higher numbers. We are in a period where the onus is on people like me to apparently prove that illness might be related to death, you know. Whereas I honestly think if people want to try to claim that austerity can happen and you can not have any effect from cutting health visitors, the onus should be on them to show that. I think it's reasonable, but I'm told no, you must show it. Austerity. IMF figures, proportion of GDP spent on public services as a whole from 2002 through to, because countries tell the IMF what they're going to do, through to 2020. You can see there, if you follow the thick black line, that's the UK. You can see the rise of Labour spending money, not fixing the roof when the sun's shining. 2002, 2003, 2004, you see it rising slightly. Sadly, for those of you who like Labour, that was the extra spending on the Iraq war. It wasn't. Anyway, the shooting up in the middle is the bailout of the banks. Ireland goes completely out of control because they asked our advice and we told them to guarantee every last bank account. Anyway, I won't talk anymore about Ireland. You can see countries like Finland and France spending over half their GDP on public services and schools and so on. And you can see us zooming down to 36% of GDP. The political debate in Britain, the Labour manifesto promises 38%. We're currently on target for 36%. We play a game within there. But anyway, that's a measure of austerity. We've had much deeper, more vicious austerity than anywhere else in Europe, far deeper than Spain and Greece, by any way in which you measure it. People in Spain and Greece are very good at talking about austerity and saying it's terrible and having strikes and refusing to have people evicted from their homes and so on. We're very stiff upper lip. We kind of take it. And that might be a national character thing. The flatlining, this is old data. This is data that stops in 2015. It was flatlining in 2015. Life expectancy is now falling. If we had a population the size of Fiji, it would be debatable. But we don't have a population the size of Fiji. The error bounds on life expectancy estimates are so tight that there's a lovely paper written in the last couple of years about which Pacific islands can we not work out life expectancy for with reliability. But of anywhere on the planet, apart from Sweden, who are better than us, we really do have a fairly good idea of the population who are in this country at risk. And we have a good idea of who's died in this country. And we had a brilliant policeman who was on the search for Lord Lucan, who actually, because he was trying to work out whether Lord Lucan was dead in this country has gone into detail about who is buried under motorway viaducts. So honestly, our death statistics are remarkably good. Life expectancy is, as I'll show you in a minute, falling. But it doesn't matter whether it's falling. It's just as bad that it's flat as if it's going down from a few weeks or months. It shouldn't be flat. We have one of the lowest life expectancies in Western Europe. There are countries like Finland where there's been no slowdown at all. And if I just go back a section, what does Finland do when austerity hits? When the banks go bust? And for the poor people in Finland, where Nokia looks like it's going to go bust because of a company called Apple, right? You might think it's game over for Finland. What Finland does is actually increase taxation so that no public service is damaged. And Finland, there's not a jot of jolt in the improvement in life expectancy. Babies are twice as likely to survive their first year of life in Finland as opposed to us. And it's not just Finland, it's just the majority of Europe. So flatlining by 2015, dropping in England for women by 2015, if you look. I won't talk about the other countries of the UK. Somebody really needs to look into depth in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has had the worst child health for decades. The Scots are now producing reports saying, as far as Scotland is concerned, they think austerity is the most likely cause. They're doing it very carefully, a bit slow for my liking, but Scotland will tell the story. Wales is likely to get ignored, but is worth. And then the Welsh NHS gets blamed, which is just silly. ONS produced this brilliant graphic, was it last year? Neonatal mortality ranking from how the ranking of the UK switched from 1990, when we were the 7th best country in Europe, to 2015, when we were down at 19th, the biggest fall. That's 2015. Since 2015, of course, we've had absolute increases in mortality. Again and again and again and again. Each one significant. And I have spent days looking at the number of babies who've died at 23, 24, 22 weeks gestation, apart from 25, 26. This is not because of more premature babies. But the instant thing we do in Britain when more babies die is we go, must be some artefact. Infant mortality is rising. It doesn't affect the life expectancy figures at all because you're talking 80 to 100 babies. But it shouldn't be rising. We shouldn't be down at 19th. And we shouldn't, although I'm very, very glad Romania is coming up so fast. But there really isn't an excuse that we are on target for our infant mortality rates to be worse in future than Romania if the current trends continue. I mean, I don't want to say it because Romania does need infant mortality to go down. When I was born, the place you always talked about was Portugal. Babies were 3 times more likely to die in Portugal than in Britain. Portugal was the kind of horror story of Europe. Now it's places like Romania, but it will be us in future if it carries on as things are going. And those are the data for the projections from the Institute of Actuaries about how the projected life expectancy of people over 65 have fallen. And now we're on to the new data. Okay, that's all known. This wasn't known until last week. 26th of June 2019, we get the annual mid-year estimates. And we know something new. And ONS will produce a series of reports this year, but all the reports they produce, I think, will be based on data that in effect has been released last week in the mid-year estimates. And we won't know anything else new until this time next year. 623,000 deaths, 20,000 more deaths than the previous year. You might say, that could be due to ageing. Great thing about the mid-year estimates is they tell us whether it's due to ageing. They tell us whether it's due to a whole load of retired people in Spain sneaking in boats or not. Which is not impossible, which we have worried about. The BBC call in Population Matters, used to be the Ottoman Population Trust, to comment on whether we still have too many people. If any country in Europe was trying to get rid of people by either being really inhospitable and rude so they don't come, or allowing them to die in greater numbers, it's us. And still, the BBC's lead commentator is somebody from the Optimum Population Trust about too many. And that's that. If you're trying to work out how the hell can this be happening in Britain, it might be because we're this kind of a country now. That's the conclusion I'm slowly coming to. The Guardian. leads on 275,000 net immigrants, and it's a little bit higher, 6,000 higher, possibly. The Express, of course, happily goes with yet another city the size of Coventry has arrived. So I decided to look at the detailed statistics for the city of Coventry, because the mid-year estimates tell you everybody who's died in Coventry by individual year of age, by sex, by how many have migrated in and where they've come from. So we know, I've got it down to, I don't know if it's there. No, I haven't got it there. I think 2 men over 90 came in from overseas into Coventry, right? Or the estimate at least is from the National Health Service records. Now, Coventry is too small an area to get the life expectancy data. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what we now know. And here's the summary. So I must leave that up for 30 seconds. This is a summary for men. The first column is the number of deaths that occurred the year before. It goes from mid-year to mid-year. So it's the number of deaths that occurred in all of England by age between June 2016 and June 2017. The second column is the number of deaths in the most recent year that has been reported. The third column is by how much it's increased. Now, the children 0 to 4 boys has actually gone down by 88. This is the third column. You go right down to the bottom and you find 9,493 more dead than the year before. But that doesn't tell you anything, because that could simply be ageing or in-migration. But then when you get to the fourth column, you have the increase in the rate having allowed for the changing underlying population at risk. And it's almost all red, because for almost every single age group, mortality is rising. And last, and I think most useful, is the rise in deaths per million people, which is for men an extra 287 deaths per million, but obviously stacked up at the older ages in particular. Now, we get fascinated by things like, why are people in their early 70s not dying? And it'll be interesting to kind of find out. And I won't begin to speculate. I think it has more to do with migration to or from the continent than anything else. It's not about golden cohorts. We don't have any golden cohorts kind of left, I think, from this. But the whole point is it's all red, and it's spread from the old down in the latest figures for men. So it's very bad news. The equivalent for women doesn't look quite so bad, except for over 90s. An extra 6,358 per million women, as compared to the year before, which was an awful year. Already life expectancy was falling. It's fallen even more. When you get all of that, life expectancy falls. ONS, I'll leave ONS. I always leave ONS to do it. I do not irresponsibly calculate my own life expectancy figures. I could. I'd use the Chung Tzu method or whatever, the other one they do. But, you don't want people producing 2 different life expectancy numbers, so I don't do that. I'll show you what ONS produce in a minute. Here are those rates drawn on a graph for increasing mortality, having taken into account the population at risk. And the other great thing the mid-year estimates do is they give us the very latest population estimates, so that we know that there hasn't been a sudden influx of people, at least that we can count. We also do things like monitor the sewage in Britain to work out how many people are here who are not counted, by the way. Right? This country's obsessed by counting people. So mortality's gone up again. And here's the figures for Wales. So we published this in the conversation. I didn't include the figures for Wales, but there they are, just to let you know it's Wales as well. I've left Northern Ireland and Scotland to somebody else to do. Steve is here from ONS. He might get annoyed, but this I think this has to be checked more. So in the ONS press release, it had words such as, there were also fewer live births in England and Wales in 2017, and it wasn't in italics, but and this meant the infant mortality rate increased from 3.9 to 3.9. The infant mortality rate doesn't increase when there are fewer births. In fact, normally it goes down because it means people have been able to be more selective over whether they want to become a parent. So as births go down around the world, infant mortality goes down even more because mothers in precarious situations are not giving birth. Anyway, just it has to tighten up a bit. Right? You can't have infant mortality rising 4 years in a row and a misleading statement from ONS. And you also can't have any more BBC more or less. I keep quoting, if anyone wants to do Twitter, just say hashtag BBC more or less. Danny Dorling said, yet again, you've got to get your act together. Because more or less did a programme about rising infant mortality where they wanted to claim it as an artefact, and it's risen again since they did that. So it's time they did it again properly this time. ONS life expectancy figures, just showing you the differences. This is the most detailed data that ONS has released. These are all the countries for which ONS had data up to 2016, without exception. The reference is at the very bottom. They don't make it easy to find. I actually set the best of our third-year students at Oxford. Simple. The question is, find this data. And if you manage it, I'll give you a first-class mark. So anyway, I don't want to have a go. ONS are brilliant. If it didn't do all this, we'd be stuck. But it could be made easier. What you're seeing here are the changes in life expectancy. That the cells coloured green are the years of the biggest kind of increase. Our last big increase was 2008 to 2010. After the financial crash, before the coalition came in. And then this is for women, 2 years of falls. It's as a proportion of a year. So you can work out what 15% of a year is, right? And these should have been going up. Now you can see Spain and Australia, they had falls from 2013 to 2015, but then they were more than reversed the next year. Not in the UK. We stand out. There's a whole table of 20 countries there in the ONS one, but they don't have 2016 data, so I'm showing you that. But essentially, we are the only place now which is having continuous falls in life expectancy of the richest countries. So that's for women. This is for men. Comes a little bit later. 2014 to 16 is the first overall fall in life expectancy. 0.07 of a year. Could work out the confidence limits. I absolutely tell you they won't include 0. That's a real fall. And yes, smaller falls happened in Australia and Spain a year before, but they were corrected. And life expectancy shot up by far more the next year. 0.18, 0.19 for Spain. And I haven't even gone down and looked at what happens in Norway, what happens in Switzerland, right? If it was flu, it's a really special kind of red, white and blue flu, right? That's all, yeah? Or that's flu everywhere, but the other countries have got their kind of system set up that they can deal with people with flu and they don't have to die in the numbers. Last slide. So I'm going to add to Gemma. I've got 2 last slides over. And this is where I'm going to now. You know, I'll carry on doing this. I've been doing it for years. I'll carry on producing, but I won't bother saying it's terrible anymore. Because there's a limit to how long you can carry on saying it's terrible. What I'm beginning to become interested in is how you come to accept things, how you come to accept it if it's slow and steady and gradual. These are the gates of Trinity College, Cambridge. Trinity College, Cambridge, for those of you who don't know, is the one college thinking of leaving the university pension scheme, and it also happens to be the richest college of any college in the UK. They have an absolute fortune, and the fortune's growing. If you look very carefully, you'll see one of the tents outside the gates of Trinity College, Cambridge, of the people who now live homeless outside the gates of Trinity. And just to match it, we have our own Trinity College, Oxford. Apparently this gate is not to be opened until the Prince returns from across the water, Bonnie Prince Charlie. And there's an enormous lawn there. Our Trinity College, Oxford's not doing bad, and if you look very carefully, you'll see the tents of the homeless people outside the gates of Trinity College, Oxford. And you'll know there are people sleeping everywhere now. And there weren't 10 years ago. And I think it's all part of this. We've become used to something, and then the worry is, because we've become used to it, we're not going to do very much about it for some time to come. I think that's what's most likely. And I'll hand over to Gemma now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi Hi there, Danny. So for those of you who didn't see, Danny's written a great piece on the conversation about some of this data. And at the end of it, Danny...
Just hold
is
it.
that better? Yeah. At the end of it, Danny, you say, so why do we care so little that we cannot even be bothered to analyse and interrogate on mortality statistics properly? I just wanted to first ask you, whose job is it to do that and to work it out? And if anyone then has a question, if you want to put your hands up, we can put these roving mics around. We've got about 10 minutes.
It doesn't... So I'll do that. It doesn't appear to be in anybody's job description. And that may have been a hindsight. If the government in the past had actually made it the remit of an authority, I would have thought that if you were a chief medical officer, you would actually decide that you should be interested in this. But none of the chief medical officers, Dame Sally included a chapter in her 10th report, which was written by Tom and Lou and me. So I'd say chief medical officers, Secretary of State for Health, particularly if you've been in for years and years and years and your name was Jeremy Hunt. He must have known what was going on. Or if Jeremy didn't know, who decided not to tell him from amongst his officials? I say anybody who has the word chief in their job title, chief nurse, chief executive NHS, all of those, I think it's fair enough to say. But it would be good if we actually made it in future a statutory responsibility of somebody, not just to report the figures, but to say what they mean and whether something should be done about them, which is what we do with schools, with Ofsted. But you could have said that nobody could have anticipated this happening. The Health Select Committee, the House of Commons, is our best bet at the moment. I think the Health Select Committee, the House of Commons, could instigate an inquiry into this. But they have to decide that it's important. The biggest rise in mortality since the Second World War might be something of interest to the Health Select Committee of the House of Commons. And the question is, why not? And this, I'm afraid I've come to the conclusion it's rather like unemployment in the 80s, which if you can remember, I can remember the 80s when it got to 3 million. But people still voted in 83 and 87 and 92 in a particular way, and the majority of the population decided it was a price worth paying for a more efficient country. And I've got a horrible feeling that the majority feeling in this country is a few elderly people, a few thousand, tens of thousands dying a bit earlier, and a few marginal babies dying rather than living is a price worth paying for what we want to get to. And that isn't what we used to think, and it isn't what other countries think. And the thing that struck me when I first saw the figures for the rise in mortality in elderly women was this was exactly the same demographic that Harold Shipman picked on. And Harold Shipman could get away with it because there was a lack of interest, particularly in elderly women living on their own, not living for longer. And I'm afraid that this is the conclusion I'm coming to now. I don't think shouting out fire and saying it's getting worse is likely to have that much effect.
Okay, does anyone have a question in the room? Okay.
We've got one there.
Yeah.
Royal Society for Public Health. There is one person who has a very great interest in all those Onus and government statistics, Ed Hutcherson of the UK Statistics Authority. And he is certainly outspoken against politicians, including Jeremy Hunt and Andrew Lansley, who've misused official statistics. Why don't they listen to Ed?
I did well. Ed has ordered them, I think it was Public Health England, to take a tweet down, and they said they would. The tweet's still up. It's probably cock-up, but I presume Ed has no teeth. There is no fine, I don't know. He has done this. He has, I complained to him at one point, the complaint was fully investigated. He decided that when they said, I forgot what it was, Department of Health and Public Health England, something like health has never been better than before, we are doing whatever, we're spending more, it's wonderful. They investigated the complaint and said, well, given that it's completely untrue, you shouldn't say it. And they said, yes, we agree. And then they did nothing. There were 23 press officers in the Department of Health who appear to have one job, which is to tell you that everything's getting better. Oh, and that you're individually responsible for your health. Yeah, eat less, exercise more.
Any other questions? Yes?
Well, I'll make a comment.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Karen Dunn. I used to be the national statistician, and before that I was the chief medical statistician or something. And I have to tell you that in my view, that however, great Ed Humperson is, I personally believe that the statistics profession was actually better at producing stuff that would rattle cages before we had this great, edifice of pretending, everything is more independent and better than it was before. Because as in those posts, I mean, A, we work very, very closely with the chief medical officers in the Department of Health, and B, basically, we publish a huge amount of stuff, for example, about, the impact of a pill on abortion rates, that, against the department's view. We publish all kinds of stuff about HIV, impact of suicide in young people, the whole, we started all that work in Britain on healthy life expectancy. And I think, I don't know the people in ONS, I don't know them anymore. But I think, they're in a position where they can actually do this stuff if they want to. And I think that when we haven't got a new national statistician yet, I don't think. Maybe they should be encouraged to, be more interested in it, because there has been over the last 5 and 10, and since I went, a huge emphasis on statistics about the economy, and much less emphasis on statistics about what's going on in our society, and that's another kind of part of it. So it's up to statistics, to put their hand up and do things, in my view.
There was just another question behind you there.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your talk. My name is John Watson, and I'm from King's Health Partners. And recently we had a talk from Chris Whitty, the new Chief Medical Officer. He's only been in the job 4 days, but anyway. And my question to you is, have you discussed these with him? Because when he gave his talk, he showed, not the up-to-date data, but he showed some similar data to that you have shown, and he lamented the data. And he sort of said, because we were going on about helping other countries, and he said, well, what about helping the equivalent of other countries that are in trouble that exist within our own country, if you follow? And I was rather impressed with him, so I don't know whether you personally sat down and bent his ear.
I haven't yet. The test will be, his first report will be January, February when it's published. They'll be deciding now the content, which will be written in October, November. So all he's got to do is mention it's happened. And he beats all the other chief medical officers since the beginning of the crisis. That's all he's got to do. The report for Scotland, in the worst ever year of Scottish health, the report that came out for Scotland headlined over-prescribing of drugs as the problem. Which, okay, yeah, is a problem. But to decide in the year of the worst ever Scottish health to do that, but I think it has to check. I mean, the key thing is, because it's carried on getting worse and worse and worse, and there may be a lull at some point, as there have been before, there does come a point when it might just be impossible not to mention this. It would be good. It's politically hard, because if it turns out that the key reason, is the biggest cuts to service funding, particularly adult social care, ever, then it is you're saying to your paymaster, you are the reason. And I can understand why that's difficult. But just saying that there is a problem and this is getting worse, that isn't difficult. And it may be related.
Okay, I think we've just got time for one more question, so just here.
Thank you for a really super talk. My name is Ingrid Wolf, I'm a pediatrician public health academic at King's College London. I'm very interested in what you said about people starting to think it's a price worth paying.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. I agree with you. I think it's hugely alarming. So my first and less important question is paying for what? What is it worth for? And a more important question is, so then what do we do about it? Because I agree with you, reluctantly, shouting about it is not enough. So what do we do about it?
Okay. very quick answer. I think it hit me when one of the nicest Conservative MPs, Peter Bottomley, said to me when I was presenting these statistics in House of Commons, he said, Danny, it's only one extra child in 1,000. And compared to the rates he'd seen in his life, I could see why it's low. I think the easiest way to do something about it, and we're fortunate, the biggest rise in terms of numbers of people and drop in life expectancy appears most recently to be places like Cheltenham and Bournemouth. And I think if you point out it's Cheltenham and Bournemouth, and it's where you, if you are in power in Britain, are going to end up in your retirement, remember, these are people in their 80s and 90s in the main. Only the middle class get to live to their 80s or 90s. So it's us, and it's our parents who don't live with us. We're 20 times more likely to take our adult children back than we are to ever allow our parent into our home. BSPS shows us that. So I would go for selfishness. I would go for it is us, our parents, it is the middle class, it is the south of England and the elderly, and see whether that works. And try to get people to think about their own last year of life. And because we never think about our own mortality, we don't. I mean, and it's terrible to say, just go for raw personal selfishness. But I think raw personal selfishness is possibly one way of doing this. Because you've got to think, where have the care workers gone who were working in the homes in the past? One of the theories we have is that the introduction of the hostile environment meant that people with dubious paperwork from countries where it's not easy to come into Britain, who were staffing an old age people's home in London, left. What do you do then? You hire whoever you can get, and the next thing you know, Panorama is showing hidden camera footage of their behaviour. And that's our last year of life. You know, the trick is get rid of the hostile environment so you can get good people to care, but also monitor these things and worry about it. Untangling exactly why this has happened will be difficult. It has to be very different reasons for the infants, which began in 2015, than for the elderly women in 2012, than for the more and more people dying in care homes, young children dying in care homes, the deaths on the streets. They're all different. But the only group who I haven't found evidence of increased mortality in Britain are prisoners in prisons, because the suicide rate got so high in the past that actually that has flatlined and not got worse. But it just needs working out. But selfishly for ourselves, forgetting about people in prisons, people in care homes, people on the streets, the middle class, elderly of Britain, our parents and us, what's going to happen to us?
Okay. Thank you very much, Danny.